The way democracy works is that you have to have the fierce urgency of this moment, the fierce urgency of now. And that even when we don't get what we want, we show up the next day, and the next day after, and the next day after, until enough is enough and true gun reform happens.
Welcome to NightCAP. It's February 22nd.
It's time for your weekly dose of commentary, analysis, and politics. I'm Fallon Gallagher.
And I'm James Duran.
And you were just watching a glimpse of Adam Gillum, the Democratic candidate for governor in Florida, put out an ad this week in the wake of last week's school shooting in Parkland, Florida. The ad highlights some of the student-run gun control activism we've been seeing in the last few days, after a gunman opened fire and killed 17 students with an assault rifle at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Students have been taking the lead in these protests, showing up at the State House in Florida over in Tallahassee, as well as the U.S. Capitol and the White House. Last night, CNN aired a town hall special that gave survivors and affected families a chance to speak directly to Senator Marco Rubio of Florida and leaders of the NRA like Dana Lash. We've seen similar activism and calls for gun control in the wake of every recent mass shooting, but now people are saying that this time feels different, that it feels a little bit more like the early stages of the Me Too movement. James?
Well, no doubt, a terrible tragedy. The 17 students and teachers and faculty who lost their lives. Certainly don't want to minimize that. One thing that I do want to, point out is this really is, as people may not want to hear it, everything that could have gone wrong really did go wrong, and we're continuing to learn more and more to that end. But already we have the FBI, Florida government agencies, local law enforcement, all putting out statements talking about how they did fail to address what were clear and present signs of danger, particularly with the local sheriff's office having 39 different encounters with this individual, including one in which the shooter put a gun to someone's head. That's what CNN's reporting today. Washington Post also reporting in the last hour or two that the school resource officer, who was an armed sheriff's deputy, took up a defensive position outside the building while the shooter was active and inside the school, still carrying out his heinous act. That deputy was suspended and later resigned. So, you talk about a lack of school safety protocols. Obviously, that's expensive to build schools in a way that they're not susceptible to this. But all that said, this individual just should not have been allowed to purchase a firearm of any kind, especially not one that fired at that velocity and fired as many bullets as it does at a time. For me, that should be the immediate focus. Let's improve information sharing. Clearly, there was.
But this also isn't the first time that we've seen this. One of these mass shootings with an individual who is on one of these lists and an oversight from the FBI.
Certainly, and so information sharing, I think, is a huge priority. We've got the Fix NICS Act, which we'll get to, and we just have to, I think, establish that, clean that up first, and go from there. But I certainly want to bring in the panel on this.
Yeah, let's bring in our round table. We'd like to welcome tonight. We have Katie Dell, our NightCAP contributor, is back with us at the round table, first time on our new set.
Great to be back.
And we have Max Wydell, who is a political science student here at Northwestern, first time on NightCAP. Thanks both of you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's dig into this. Katie, I want to start with you. Do you think that this time is different? I said earlier that this seems like it's gaining some of the momentum that we saw with early stages of the Me Too movement. Do you think it's different maybe because these students are old enough to advocate for themselves, or the role of social media? What do you think?
Well, I think what's really different, Fallon, about this time is that you see the actual victims speaking out. These people are not children. They're grown. They're in high school. They're very articulate. They're going on national media. They're working with the government. There are demonstrations in Washington and at the state level in Florida. I think the way that this mirrors the Me Too movement is the activism from actual victims, and I think that is what's getting national attention this time, is the voices of those students.
Certainly.
Yeah, and Max, your thoughts. What is this time different for you? What has your response been, to all this?
Yeah, I think this time it's definitely resonated with me a bit more. These students are near my age and yours.
Certainly.
And really, out of this tragedy, they come out speaking with such wisdom in certain times. I know one of the students was asked, what would you do to curtail the gun issue? And he basically said, you guys are the adults. You guys are the ones that are supposed to figure this out, not us. And I think, definitely the social media aspect has definitely led it to spread farther than it ever has before, and it's definitely been fiery. There's a lot of people touched by this, and everyone from the students and the parents and the community as a whole been inspired.
I agree with that. I think it's truly striking. I have a little sister who's a senior in high school, and she feels so young to me, and then you see these 15-year-old kids coming up. They're not even old enough to have a driver's license, not old enough to vote, and these are the kids who are speaking out, speaking like truth to power to these elected officials like Senator Marco Rubio, which we'll dig into more later, and it's striking.
Right, and you think these are the kids who grew up, you know, in a post-Columbine childhood. They've been inundated with this kind of tragedy throughout their entire lives, and I think it's taken something to happen to them to be able to say what's going on here to the adults. And I think, you know, 15 years they're going to be our elected officials, and that, you know, hopefully it won't take until then for real change to happen.
Well, and the crazy thing is how real it's becoming for these young kids. I know we're not much older, but when we were in elementary school, I remember we'd have lockdown drills, but I never thought of it as there's an active shooter in our school. It was just more like bad people are here, and now these young kids are having to confront this. Yeah,
certainly impressive the composure and Max, like you said, the wisdom that they have at such a young age. I wanted to talk to you about one person who appears to have been struck by their their voice, and that's President Trump. Reportedly polling over the weekend, the members at Mar-a-Lago, I'm sure also some White House staffers,
that's
about
some airtight polling, right, pollster?
About whether he should come out in favor, of certain measures. Certainly seems like, obviously this is not an ideologically rigid president. It seems like he is weighing whether it's limiting magazine capacity, whether it's raising the age to 21 for semi-automatic weapons. I mean, is that the right move for him politically as sort of a malleable figure? Do you think that's where he should be?
Definitely in the moment, it works for him in terms of the way that the debate has been framed around these mass shootings. These would seemingly be an appropriate response, getting rid of the bump stocks and high-capacity magazines. But I think on the large, he's going to have to face with larger issues that these mass shootings really only account for 2% of all gun deaths in the nation, and that it's not a one solution for the whole problem, that he's going to have to kind of get down and dirty with Congress and narrow down on specific issues that are affecting different communities and different types of people who commit these types of acts.
Right.
Certainly, and I know we saw that bipartisan legislation coming back into the conversation. We saw it first after Sutherland Springs in Texas, but now we have Senator Cornyn of Texas and Chris Murphy of Connecticut talking about that bipartisan legislation to increase background checks. But we want to jump really quickly with the NRA has been making headlines, more vocal than usual in the wake of this shooting, and we saw them in full force this morning at CPAC. But they're out with a new ad. And we want to take a quick look at it.
I'm going to say it again. The mainstream media love mass shootings. Now, I'm in no way saying that people in the media wish for the deaths of innocent people. I don't believe that at all. But the truth of the matter is, if there's one organization in this country that has a vested interest in the perpetuation of mass tragedy, it is our mainstream media. The dirty secret is, mass shootings have become their Game of Thrones, their House of Cards, their Seinfeld, and their Friends, all wrapped into one. And whenever they get one, they wring out every last episode they can to juice their ratings and push their agenda, because tragedy is their business model. I mean, if it bleeds, it leads, right? But only if it's the right amount of blood from the right people at the right time. 30 people shot over the course of a weekend in Southside Chicago? Nah. Let the local news handle it. Just a bunch of black kids no one cares about anyway. Armed citizen uses a gun to stop a violent crime? Absolutely not. We can't have people thinking that actually happens. Crazy kid shoots up suburban high school with 17 dead? Bingo.
That's some pretty strong rhetoric coming out of that ad. I know I've got a lot of thoughts on it, being a member of the media, but Katie, I'm curious, what did you think about that?
Well, I think that there were a lot of good points brought up in the ad. I personally feel that although, as Max said, mass shootings are only 2% of gun deaths, I think it is still a very important issue. I think that what the spokesman, the Freedom guy in the ad is saying is true. From Chicago, we do see several shootings over every weekend, but that does not in any way diminish what's going on in the media. I think has a responsibility to cover the stories as they're doing without sensationalizing them. And I think that it's been going pretty well, and I think giving the students exposure is more important than trying to subdue that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, an incendiary sort of ad in the way it was structured, but I do sort of agree that you know, the broader argument, kind of refined argument, I think is an interesting one. I mean, Max, what did you think about the ad?
Yeah, you know, the media likes to cover mass shootings because it's our children, you know, it's the nation's children, and it affects us all in that way, and you know, young and innocent lives, and try to kind of deflect that narrative onto something else. And there are good points that the NRA does have on its platform. You know, aside from just the Second Amendment alone, but just the way deaths occur.
Maybe they can just take the temperature down a bit.
Yes.
So I want to jump to an event that happened last night. So of course we had the CNN town hall, which we alluded to. And you know, Fallon, I think we all agree that what these kids are doing, you know, the voice that they're able to, you know, to have and using to effectuate change is certainly great to see. But I thought at times the tone of the town hall, sort of the spectacle of it all, kind of crossed the line a little bit for me. You know, Katie, I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, we had that moment with Senator Rubio where he was asked to pledge to not take another dollar from the NRA. You know, and sort of the crowd contributing to that. I mean, what did you make of the whole event?
Well, I thought it was an interesting event for Rubio to agree to participate in the first place. I mean, you could tell that the crowd immediately was hostile to him.
But how do you think the conversation would be differing if he didn't show up at all?
Well, I think that he realized that, and I think that for him to not show up as President Trump
and as the governor of Florida
didn't show up would have also been detrimental. But I could see that he wasn't prepared for the student to ask him to pledge in the name of the 17 victims not to accept NRA donations, and he didn't really know how to respond. And I think that it did not come off well for the senator.
Yeah, I mean, Max, quickly, I mean, your thoughts on that whole?
I think it's very representative of the national debate on guns right now. This typically happens after one of these flashpoint events, that everything gets very hot and fiery on both sides, and everyone kind of digs their heels in. But we need to have these types of forums, and we need to be able to speak about it, perhaps with a little bit less of the pathos that was present there.
Certainly. Just to wrap this up, you know, one final thought, Fallon, that I had. I mean, the NRA sending Dana Loesch to the town hall, their web ad up today. This is an organization that, as you sort of hinted at, historically goes dark for weeks after a mass shooting. And so you can be sure that if no one else thinks this time is different, they absolutely think this time is different.
And I wonder if they're thinking this time is different is what's going to make others like
Certainly,
a spillover effect.
And I think it's important to understand why, and we'll end on this note. And you know, I think they sense that they may lose key allies this time. We mentioned President Trump openly considering the sort of reforms that the NRA has opposed for decades. You heard Senator Rubio sort of cave on magazine size laws and moving the age up to 21 for semi-automatic rifles. I mean, that was newsworthy last night. And if they lose Trump in particular on those, they lose much of their base on those issues. They lose much of their sway with that base. And contrary to what you hear, the NRA really does derive its strength from its members. $4 or $5 million for Marco Rubio's campaign is not the kind of money that changes his mind on votes when he's raising 10 times that. The reason he and others vote with the NRA, besides their preterm beliefs, is because NRA members are some of the most organized and reliable primary voters on the planet, and they have a numbers advantage. But if those voters have another beacon, it's a little less extreme, Trump, for example, coming out in favor of raising the age, or gun magazines, maybe then you'll start to see real progress. And so that's what I'm hopeful for, and I think that is certainly a possibility.
Yeah, I think your point with Trump is definitely relevant. You know, they were saying CPAC is now TPAC because Trump is conservatism these days.
We'll be back with more NightCap in a minute. I have to leave it there. Stick with us.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight For they trump sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern win that game. Go Cats!
Special counsel Robert Mueller filed more charges in the Manafort Gates case earlier today. This new indictment has been long expected. It contained about 32 counts, including bank and tax fraud charges. This comes after the 12-count indictment against Manafort last October. Both Paul Manafort and Rick Gates worked on the Trump 2016 campaign. This new indictment comes as Mueller seems to be revving up his entire investigation. Last week, he indicted 13 individual Russian nationals for meddling in the 2016 election. Also, ex-Skadden lawyer Alex Vanderswan, with connections to Manafort, pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI in the Russia investigation. It is important to note, though, that none of these indictments accuse President Trump of obstruction of justice, a fact that the president has been proudly proclaiming on Twitter, writing, quote, "The Trump campaign did nothing wrong. No collusion." James?
Yes, so I want to focus on the heart of the matter, which are the indictments that are relevant to the 2016 campaign. Obviously, Paul Manafort's been a shady character for a long time, and those alleged crimes did occur prior to his involvement with the Trump campaign. So, per NBC News, on this question of the 13 Russian nationals, I really want to get into the details because I think it is stunning the level of sophistication of their operation in the 2016 election. As NBC News reports, the defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States with the stated goal of spreading distrust toward the candidates and the political system in general. Some defendants traveled to America to collect intelligence and to reach a significant number of Americans for the purposes of interfering with the U.S. political system, including the presidential election of 2016. And just to sum that up, it charges all the defendants, all 13, as well as 3 Russian entities with conspiracy to defraud the United States, 3 defendants with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud, and 5 with aggravated identity theft. Certainly stunning news. I mean, Katie, what did you make of sort of this level of sophistication, the details outlined in those indictment documents?
Well, James, I just think it's completely wild how strong the desire for the election of President Trump the Russians had at this time. And it makes me question everything that's going on. And also I question President Trump's reaction of, oh, I'm innocent, versus what is going on with our national security? How is this allowed to happen? We don't see that from him, and that's really what's most concerning, I think, in the wake of these indictments for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Absolutely. And Max, in the last week, we've seen National Security Advisor McMaster and the DNI both state in front of the Senate committee that there was tangible interference in the 2016 election. We have tangible evidence of this, leaving President Trump essentially the only government figure who has not acknowledged this. And Peter Baker was out with an article in the New York Times this week where he wrote, quote, "We are fighting this war, the war against the Russians, without a commander-in-chief." Do you think that's accurate?
I think it's accurate to a certain point. That there is this war. I wonder to the extent of it. Obviously, that we see that the Russian actors will go to great lengths to do something, but the question is how far is the influence, and what proof do we have of such influence on the election? A lot of this is pitted against, did Trump collude, or did people knowingly collude with the Russian government? But collusion in itself isn't really the crime.
Right, it's not actually legally
it's
defined.
It's not legally defined. I mean, you can conspire to do a crime or something like that, which obviously you can get prosecuted for, but a lot of this rhetoric seems to be trying to pit Trump against the Russians and so on and so forth, but without any actual tangible evidence that I've yet to see. And I don't know how far this is going. Obviously, we see that the Russians are willing to go far, but this is just 13 Russians and 3 companies. I don't know how far it is.
But do you think the fact that Mueller is revving this up so much shows that he's nowhere near done? He still has rocks to unturn, and this investigation is not ending anytime soon?
He may. I just question Mueller on the fact that Manafort got indicted for things that happened way before the election. I don't know what exactly his goals are.
Well, it's so
here.
blatant that it sort of begs the question: why was he not indicted of these things prior to the campaign? But I think you made an important point, which is that collusion, right? Not a technically defined, a technical term in the law. But I do think that these charges of conspiracy to defraud the U.S., I think that is sort of maybe hinting at what that charge might actually amount to, what collusion might amount to as a legally defined crime. But I do want to get your take quickly, though. Katie pointed out, that we certainly haven't heard from the president, and does that concern us? I mean, does that concern you, sort of as a person who maybe isn't necessarily aligned with the Adam Schiffs, the Bob Muellers of this sort of back and forth? But when you have this national security team saying that they're going to be back in 2018, and we don't sort of hear an appreciation of that fact from the president, I mean, what does that say?
Yeah, I think he's trying to figure out exactly where he stands on the issue as well. I think he's playing both sides of the fence and not wanting to pick just yet.
But don't
exactly
you
where he
think he's
stands.
had plenty of time to make that choice? We've been in this for almost a year now.
Oh, he has. And that doesn't mean he's right. I just think he's still trying to figure out what the best course of action for him, the president, is going to be.
Right, and he's acting as though these indictments are a victory, but they don't in any way necessarily exonerate him. Although it says, I think Mueller uses the
He
word
loves to win.
unwittingly
Winning's his favorite.
about whoever aided the individual Russians and the company.
Right.
It doesn't say by no means did the president do anything. That's not there. So I think that he's treading pretty carefully right now.
Okay, so we're going to have to leave it right there. We've had a lot of heavy news so far. So on a lighter note, we're going to turn to Extra Extra. Usually we see James in this segment. This time you'll see me as well as NightCAP contributor Katie Dell. We took a little field trip last week to the center of it all, to our nation's capital, or as our president calls it, the swamp. We saw a lot of the major sites, so let's take a quick look at this clip. Taking NightCAP on location this week in the district with NightCAP contributor Katie Dell, and we're seeing all the really important sites. We're right here outside of Comet, Pizzagate. If any of you are familiar with my favorite political scandal, better than the Russia investigation, is Pizzagate. So we're here, we're seeing the important sites. So unfortunately, we had planned to make it a whole tour, and there were supposed to be multiple clips. DC got the best of us, and we didn't have time to get to all of them, so we just went to Comet. But we tried really hard.
Some
anyway,
excellent reporting there, guys.
just field reporting, that's what I do best. But if you're enjoying the conversation, follow along on social media at NightCapNU. And if you're really enjoying the conversation and you'd like to join us at the round table, you can send us a message on social media. We'll be back with more NightCAP in a minute.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
We've been looking ahead to the 2018 midterm elections here on NightCAP. With a Republican-controlled White House and Congress, we've been assuming that the Democrats would win back control of Congress, which is a typical trend that we see in American politics. But it looks like the GOP may be gaining some new momentum. The New York Times and SurveyMonkey are out with some new polling that shows the tax reform bill from last year is now popular with 51% of Americans. Also this week, the RNC continues to dominate fundraising, and the NRCC outraises the DCCC for the first time in 8 months. James?
Yes, and a third thing here, the generic ballot. This is a ballot test without candidate names that is asked to national samples across the country, to likely voters across the country in a national sample. This is a metric that is closely monitored by the likes of the DCCC and the NRCC, and that is gradually rebounding from what was a shocking Democrat advantage, spiking toward the latter stages of 2017 calendar year. And you can see that chart, and certainly a lot of up and down here, but we can see a general trend line, which is that gray line, really coming back to sort of a normal advantage that you expect to see of the party picking up a certain amount of seats, but perhaps not the 25 plus that the Democrats need to regain control of the House. So that's certainly something I'm watching to see if that continues.
And that's your original research that we just saw right there, right?
That's right. It's a NightCAP chart.
A NightCAP sourced graphic. On the other hand, though, we want to take a quick look at Pennsylvania. The Dems do still have some strong prospects of winning back the House, especially after the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that the state's congressional districts were unconstitutional. So under the map, the districts were more closely aligned with the state's county lines, giving Dems the upper hand.
Yes, and so now we have, so they made that announcement a couple weeks ago, and of course this week they released the new map drawn by a Stanford scholar.
Which we just saw.
And these new maps are interesting. It's sort of a couple things to note here. We've got a graphic on screen of kind of the shift from a Trump advantage to a Clinton advantage in a couple of districts. Most of them staying Trump or staying Clinton, but pretty large percentage changes in how the 2016 presidential election would have shaken out had these new maps been in place. A couple things to note: it's not going to affect the fast approaching Pennsylvania 18 special election, which we'll cover in detail as we get closer to that. Two, many Republican incumbents in traditionally safe seats could be in trouble and will find themselves actually living in different districts than a couple days ago in some cases. And certainly retirements of Charlie Dent, Congressman Meehan, Schuster, and Barletta running for Senate will compound that problem. But looking at this, peripherally, I know that graphic is kind of a busy graphic. It seems fairly benign if you dig into this, even leaning Republican if you look at sort of the mean shift or the average shift or the total shift. But really what they've done here and what people have taken issue with is that the map has created vote sinks, right? So for those of you who are invested in environmental climate change, you think of carbon sinks, right? They suck in carbon. Well, these vote sinks suck in Republican votes from other districts, and as a result, there are more places that are competitive for Democrats. And so the second thing, of course, that wasn't on that graphic is that President Obama won 5 out of 18 districts in 2012, and with this map, he would have won 9 out of 18. So that's something that sort of conveys the story, I think, a little bit differently. But a lot to play for here.
It's definitely a pretty wild shift. We don't have a lot of time here, but we want to bring in our panel for one quick question.
Yeah, I mean, Katie, how do you see these sort of conflicting narratives, these conflicting momentum changes shaking out? I mean, where do we see this going?
Well, it's concerning for Democrats, I think, especially in the wake of the new tax bill. I wonder if there will be any regret about not supporting. I just think that hopefully there'll be enough momentum for them to pull through.
Yeah, Max, will Democrats regret not voting for this tax bill?
Perhaps. Definitely support, even for on the Democrat side, has increased for them, which definitely is a big shift from just a few months ago. But I think,
fundamentals are still there for the
Democrats. I think the
Democrats.
fundamentals are still there for them.
I think that's
Great.
fair.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave this conversation there, but on to our favorite segment, in case you missed it. What'd you miss this week? Our roundtable is going to let you know. Max, let's start with you.
Yes. One of my favorite guitar companies, Gibson, is in near bankruptcy. Very sad to see. They've been around since the 1800s, and I love all their instruments, but hopefully they can turn it around in the next few months.
It's wild. It's kind of like Toys R Us. It's Amazon is just taking over everything.
Don't forget Babies R Us, too.
I don't think anyone wants to buy an
Little
Amazon
babies.
guitar, but maybe I'm wrong. Katie?
So this is for all you Oxford commas out there, Oxford comma lovers out
I'm
there.
an Oxford comma
You
gal.
are, you are, I know that. In Maine, 3 truck drivers back in 2014 sued their dairy company, Oakhurst.
I think you talked about that when you were on the show that time, right?
I might have.
Is there an update?
No. I think she was
No.
talking about cereal last
I
time.
was
right,
I
okay.
talk about
Katie's
food
on
all
the
the
food
time. I'm
beat
a
for
big
us.
food girl.
Right.
But anyway, they've reached a settlement for $5 million. There was a dispute regarding overtime pay, and these 3 truck drivers sued their company for a year of overtime pay because there was a lack of comma between 2 words. So basically, they settled because Oxford comma. They need
Because
it.
Oxford commas, that's all you need to know.
That's all you need.
One last thing for me, it doesn't sound like good news, but I thought it was good news. I thought that if this person can be positive, then we all can be. The wife of a slain Chicago police commander, Paul Bauer, wrote a letter which was published in the Chicago Tribune this week, and just to give you a quick excerpt. I saw people of every color taking time out of their day, not only to pay respects to Paul, but to the entire Chicago Police Department. They are the men and women who selflessly put their lives on the line each day to protect people they don't even know. They are my new family. I saw each and every one of you from the darkened window of my car. The good people in this world far outnumber the bad. Grace and I are humbled as Paul would be. One man almost stole my faith in humanity, but the city of Chicago and the rest of the nation restored it, and I want to thank you for that. So thank you, Aaron Bauer, obviously keeping them in our thoughts.
Yeah,
certainly.
That's really great. Well, if you have something great that we missed, tweet at us at NightCapNU. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. I want to thank again to Katie and Max for joining us tonight. It was a great conversation. If that wasn't enough of a nightcap, it's only 8:30. There's plenty of time to keep talking.
Thanks. We'll see you next week.